came in like a literal freight train in the 1950s, but what happened right before it that provoked such a huge cultural change that is now the blueprint for all popular music? The Second World War was monumental. It turned the world upside down in countless ways. One of the uncomfortable truths of life is that progress is often born of desperation, and music is no exception. If you're a fan of history or music, you might like our content. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Now let's take a jump back to the 1940s and take a look at how the Second World War inspired the development of music for generations to come. One of the significant cultural shifts to come out of the Second World War was the birth of globalization. This inevitably led to the fusion of traditions and ideas from all over the world. Before the war, America was rich with musical genres like folk, jazz, blues, country, and swing, and each one brought something unique to the table. Jazz was the soundtrack of the nightclubs during Prohibition. The blues told a story of struggle and resilience, very similar to folk and country music. Then there was swing music, the big band era, where you'd have countless musicians on stage creating this huge booming sound. And it was the accessibility of the radio that brought this sound into people's homes for the first time.
Report of today's bombing of Wilhelmshaven, the big Nazi submarine base, by American flying fortresses and liberators. We take you to CBS London, John Daly reporting.
Correspondents assigned to the United States Army 8th Air Force today made their first operational flight over Germany.
In September 1939, the first shots were fired in Europe, which ignited the Second World War. But the American government did everything in their power to stay out of it, stating that it wasn't their business to get involved in European conflicts. That is, until December 1941.
Here is the motion picture record released by the United States Navy of the havoc wrought by the sneak sky and sea raid on Pearl Harbor, America's mid-Pacific naval bastion.
Imperial Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, devastating the naval base, resulting in over 3,000 American casualties. President Franklin D. Roosevelt immediately declared war. By the end of the conflict, there were over 2 million Americans in the European theater and another million in the South Pacific and all over the world. So here are 3 million young Americans of all different upbringings and backgrounds from all over the United States. Black Americans, white Americans, Latin Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and Arab Americans, all working together for a common goal, in some cases for the first time, because if you were from a big city, maybe you had interacted before with other cultures and races. But when nearly 60 million Americans still lived in rural communities before the war, diversity was still kind of a revolutionary concept. So now you had the kids from the mountains of Appalachia meeting the kids from the Deep South. Latin Americans meeting Chicago jazz musicians. And their music spread and evolved and created this new sound that was entirely American. Music was also a very powerful way for Americans to connect with other cultures.
This is 2 weeks after D-Day. It was dark, raining, muddy, and I'm stressed, so I get my trumpet out. And the commander says, "Jack, don't play tonight because there's one sniper left." I thought to myself, that German sniper is as scared and lonely as I am. So I thought, I'll play his love song. Dun, dun, dee, dee, dee. The next morning, here came a jeep up from the beach about 1.5 miles away. And the military police says, "Hey, Captain, there's some German prisoners." One of them keeps saying in broken English, "Who played that trumpet last night?" When I heard that number that you played, I thought about my fiancée in Germany. I thought about my mother and dad, and about my brothers and sisters, and I couldn't fire. And he stuck out his hand, and I shook the hand of the enemy. He was no enemy, he was scared and lonely like me.
In addition to this, the big bands of the 20s and 30s were finding it increasingly difficult to find and keep musicians, because so many of them were having to put down their trumpets and pick up their rifles. The inevitable result was that bands started featuring fewer and fewer musicians. And as they continued to interact with people around the world, they introduced their music to those people. This was something that started back in the First World War, igniting the jazz age in England and around Europe. Because when the war ended and everybody went home, the influence influence of American culture went with them, leaving a lasting impression on the global music scene. In post-war Britain, Black American music absolutely took over the culture. And it was the children of this generation in England who would forever change the face of music with the British invasion.
The young working class men in particular were getting used to the fact that they were having to find a new way of getting dignity, respect, without being a member of the services, because everybody in the previous generation had been in the services. Every single one of them. If they hadn't been in the services, they were either black marketeers or that they were conscientious objectors. This was a story that was very much my story, my childhood story, but I couldn't really quite work it out why Tommy had been so accepted. I suddenly realised that it had been accepted because it was like holding up a mirror to an entire generation of people who said, yes, this is me, this is what I feel. And this is what I went through. This is my experience, not precisely, but very much, or an experience that many shared. The suffering of people in the war was real. Real bombs had dropped on them. My mother and father played at a concert in Bristol when the back of the theatre was bombed, and they both pulled out bits of people from the rubble. You know, it's hard to imagine what that could have been like. Other people, of course, were evacuated, taken away from their parents and sent to the countryside, and often sent into the care of people who didn't take care of them properly because they thought, we're all dead anyway, you know. And when you came home from those places, you were expected to be grateful. You know, you're alive, you know, there's peace now. Just shut up about the war. So nobody talked about it. You know, if you sat with your granddad and you said, what was it like? He'd just say, listen, I don't want to know. As we now read about the war, we know why. It was absolutely shocking. Shocking beyond belief. But my generation, which was born post-VE Day, all we got was the party. You know, it was like, it's all over. You know, my generation, we remember the end of the war, the bomb, you know, and that was our thing. The bomb, it's 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 the bomb. The only thing that matters is the bomb, it's the bomb, it's the bomb, it's the bomb. It's the one thing that's never happened to us is the fucking bomb. Everything else has happened, but that's what they told us.
I was only 5 months old when Daddy died, is the line in the song, yeah. The story that was handed down to me was that when he was home on leave and I was only just being born, my brother was already 2 years old. And so he was old enough to sit on my father's knee when he was home on leave, learning to be a second lieutenant and go off to Italy to be killed. I feel a bit emotional telling you this now because although I don't remember it, because I was mercifully spared memories that my brother and father shared because I was only 5 months old. So I don't remember. I have no memory of meeting my father or of any connection or of any of that. It's just that I grew up with this enormous hole in my life. I actually explain in a movie that we made called The Wall a few years ago.
Somebody knocking on my door.
This is going on behind the scenes, mainstream culture is still very resistant in America, where segregation would continue to be a problem for like 2 more decades. Radio stations were being heavily censored, and much of that early blues music failed to receive mainstream airplay as a result. This was an era before the internet. If people wanted to hear this music, they had to go out and find it. But still somehow it spread, and music would develop into something that would be a driving force for social progress, whether the mainstream liked it or not. Another huge advance advance that came as the result of the war was technological. And in this post-war boom that the Americans were experiencing, more people had more access to this technology, which inevitably made them more aware of what was going on in the world. Before the war, there were approximately 5,000 television sets in use in the United States. By 1950, that number had grown to about 6 million, because they just became more affordable and people had more money to spend. Social awareness became more common as a result of the war. All of this, of course, bled into the music. And on it would go into the 50s and 60s, and the civil rights movement in America would, funny enough, correspond with the progression and growth of rock and roll.
Hey boy, we'll show these fascists what a couple of hillbillies can do.
All right, who were some of the most famous musicians who served in the Second World War? The first one that comes to my mind is Woody Guthrie, who got involved early when he joined the Merchant Marines, taking part in a couple of very dangerous missions transporting munitions to the front. Not long after that, he was drafted into the U.S. Army. Howlin' Wolf signed up for the Army in 1941, right after Pearl Harbor, and he was honorably discharged after 2 years of service. Tony Bennett was drafted into the Army at the end of the war, and was among the American soldiers who liberated the concentration camps after the enemy defeat in 1945.
I was in the Second World War. I was in France and Germany as an infantryman, and it was the first time I ever made a record. It was right after the Battle of the Bulge, and it was a bloody battle. I'll never forget the psychological attitude of the soldiers. They will never be the same. There was one bomb that the Germans had. This whistle came, it was so loud, I said, this is it. And I prayed to God that it wouldn't hit me, and we ran away from it. Killing is the lowest form of human behavior, fighting, war. It's insane. I thought it was inhuman to kill somebody.
Well, now will you sing this other song for us?
I'd love to.
Fine.
Hank Williams was 4F due to a back injury, but every single one of his musicians in his band was drafted into the Army. Glenn Miller signed up for the Army in 1942, found himself in the U.S. Army Air Force, where he started Major Glenn Miller's Army Air Force Orchestra.
Naturally, we're very reluctant to give up our moonlight serenades, but since I got a date with Uncle Sam coming up, I can sincerely say I'd rather have Harry James take over than anyone I know.
Captain Miller, speaking for the folks that make Chesterfields, I'm sure everyone agrees that you're doing a mighty fine thing in joining the Army. A lot of good luck to you, Glenn.
Thank you very much, Larry. There's a lot of swell guys in the outfit I'm going in, and maybe all of us can get together again after this thing is over. In the meantime, I'll see you all in the Army, and we'll say goodbye the best way we know how.
Glenn was incredibly successful during the war, entertaining the troops around Europe with his band, until 1944 when he got into a small plane with two others and they crashed into the English Channel, killing everybody on board. In February 1945, he was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star Medal. So what do you think? Would rock and roll have occurred without the advent of the Second World War? Or was war essential to its incarnation? Let us know in the comments, and if you like this video and you want to see more music history content, don't forget to like and subscribe.